What makes a presidential speech unforgettable? Sometimes it's the words that rally a nation to war. Other times, it's a message that comforts a grieving people. And in rare cases, it's the call to unite a divided country. In this video, we'll count down the top 10 greatest U.S. presidential speeches, moments where presidents used words, not weapons, to change the course of history. Number 10. FDR's Four Freedoms Speech, 1941.
In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms.
In January 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress with a vision that went far beyond America's borders. He spoke of four essential human freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. At a time when much of the world was under the shadow of tyranny, Roosevelt gave Americans and allies overseas a framework for what they were fighting for. The Four Freedoms speech wasn't just policy, it was an idealistic blueprint for democracy, one that inspired artists like Norman Rockwell and continues to echo in global discussions about human rights today. 9. Ronald Reagan's Challenger Disaster Address, 1986.
We mourn 7 heroes.
On January 28, 1986, millions of Americans watched in horror as the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff. That night, President Ronald Reagan addressed a shaken nation.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss.
He spoke not as a politician, but as a fellow American, grieving the loss of 7 brave astronauts. With words drawn from the poem High Flight, Reagan said the crew had slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God. His short but powerful speech transformed national sorrow into a tribute, ensuring that the Challenger crew would be remembered with dignity and honor. Number 8. Dwight D. Eisenhower's Farewell Address, 1961.
From the White House in the office of the President of the United States, we present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower.
In January 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a former 5-star general, prepared to leave office after 2 terms.
3 days from now, after half a century in the service of our country, I shall lay down the responsibilities of office.
His farewell address is remembered for one striking warning: the rise of the military-industrial complex.
We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Eisenhower cautioned that the growing partnership between the military and private industry could distort democracy and concentrate too much power in too few hands. At the height of the Cold War, his words were both surprising and prophetic. Today, they remain one of the most quoted warnings ever delivered by a president. Number 7. George Washington's Farewell Address, 1796. As the nation's first president, George Washington had no blueprint to follow. But when he stepped down in 1796, he left behind wisdom that would guide generations. In his farewell address, Washington urged Americans to avoid the dangers of political factions and to steer clear of permanent foreign alliances. Though the U.S. eventually veered into both partisanship and global entanglements, Washington's warnings became touchstones for statesmen and citizens alike. His farewell remains a foundational piece of political philosophy in America's story. Number 6. Ronald Reagan at the Brandenburg Gate, 1987. Standing in West Berlin in June 1987, Ronald Reagan faced the towering concrete of the Berlin Wall. The Cold War had divided East from West for decades, but Reagan's message was simple and direct.
Today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. At the time, many critics dismissed it as unrealistic. Yet just 2 years later, the wall fell, and Reagan's bold words became a defining moment in the struggle for freedom. The speech remains a symbol of America's role in ending the Cold War. Number 5. John F. Kennedy's Inaugural Address, 1961. In January 1961, a young John F. Kennedy stood on the steps of the Capitol to deliver his first speech as president. Against the backdrop of the Cold War, Kennedy called for unity and sacrifice.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
His words still inspire. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That single line became one of the most quoted in American history. The address set the tone for a presidency filled with hope, ambition, and a belief in civic responsibility. Number 4. FDR's first inaugural address, 1933. The year was 1933. The Great Depression had paralyzed the country with banks failing and unemployment soaring. Franklin D. Roosevelt's first inaugural address had to restore confidence.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
He delivered one of the most memorable lines in presidential history. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
With those words, Roosevelt turned despair into determination. His speech gave Americans not just reassurance, but a rallying cry to rebuild their country in its darkest economic hour. Number 3. FDR's Day of Infamy speech, 1941. On December 8, 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress just one day after Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
His opening words, a date which will live in infamy, set the tone for America's entry into World War II. It was a brief speech, but one that galvanized Congress and the public into unanimous resolve.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Within hours, the United States had declared war. The speech remains a model of clarity, brevity, and power in times of crisis. Number 2. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, 1865. By March 1865, the Civil War was nearly over, and Abraham Lincoln was beginning his second term. Instead of boasting about victory, Lincoln spoke of reconciliation. With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. These words showed Lincoln's extraordinary vision, an appeal not for revenge but for healing. Just weeks later, he would be assassinated, but his second inaugural endures as one of the most profound calls for unity ever delivered by an American president. And last but not least, at number 1, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, 1863. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln rose to speak at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Civil War still raged, and the nation was deeply divided. His speech lasted barely 2 minutes, but his words became immortal. He began by looking back to America's founding. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Lincoln reminded his audience that the Civil War was not just a struggle for territory, but a test of whether democracy itself could endure. Standing among the graves of thousands who had fallen, he declared, "The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract." And with a closing vision that still defines America today, Lincoln promised a new birth of freedom. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. What was meant as a short reflection became the most famous speech in American history, a masterclass in brevity, power, and purpose. These speeches remind us that history isn't only shaped on the battlefield or in the halls of Congress. It's also shaped at the podium. From Washington's farewell to Lincoln's immortal words, America's presidents have used language to inspire, console, and unite. Which of these speeches do you think deserves the #1 spot? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to History Digest for more top moments, endless stories.